And now on to today's program. A big part of my job is to tackle and dismantle ageism. And that is why one of the reasons we're here today. As I said earlier, this program is a collaboration with Changing the Narrative. I am honored to welcome our moderator today, Janine Vanderburg, the Director and Chief Catalyst, Janine, of Changing the Narrative. Changing the Narrative is a campaign to change the way people think, talk, and act about aging and ageism. Janine chairs the Encore Network, a global coalition of leaders who champion the civic, social, and economic contribution of people age 50 plus. And she's an Encore Public Voices Fellow. She is a former member of the Denver Commission on Aging, and she won the Mayor's Diversity and Inclusion Award for Advocacy for older adults. She is working very hard to change the narrative around aging for so many people, and she has done that for me. My work with Janine and my learning from her has truly been transformative for myself, and she has done that for our public library staff, our community, and I am so grateful to Janine for her work. So everyone, please welcome Janine Vanderburg, and she will get us started on our program. Janine?
Amy, thank you so much. I am so grateful to be here with all of you. But before we start, if we could just take 10 seconds to remember the Atlanta and Boulder victims of gun violence this past week. Thank you. So as Amy mentioned, I direct an initiative that is funded by Next 50 Initiative and Rose Community Foundation called Changing the Narrative. And our goal is to change the way that we think, talk, and act about aging and about ageism. And we really have this very big goal. We want to end ageism. And part of what we do that by a combination of workshops. We do workshops on reframing aging, on ending ageism. We talk to businesses about the business case for older workers and for intergenerational workplaces. We facilitate and host intergenerational conversations because we know when we talk across generations, that helps reduce stereotypes. And we do things like this that we call narrative change events, of bringing in thoughtful and provocative people who have written books that in and of themselves change the narrative. And because we know, especially now in this post-pandemic, where many older workers have been pushed out, we're facing a situation that is somewhat similar to the situation that we faced after the Great Recession. And so I had read Elizabeth White's book some time ago, actually, when I was on the Denver Commission on Aging, reread it again. And so when we were partnering with the Denver Public Library, I thought, Elizabeth is a speaker and someone for our time. So I am very grateful that Elizabeth is here with us. I just want to kind of tribute back to the library for your tribute to us. We partner with Denver Public Library and library systems because we know this. In a time when people are skeptical about information, we know that libraries still across the country are a very trusted source of information. So when we are trying to do bold things like change the way people think about older people and about older workers, it's important to partner with organizations that have trust of community. So Amy and Jennifer, as usual, so grateful to be able to partner with you on this. So here's how the session is going to work. I'm going to introduce Elizabeth. We are going to have a conversation. I'll queue up some questions, and then towards the end, we will turn it over to you. Along the way, feel free to post comments and questions in the chat, and both Amy and Jennifer from the library will be monitoring that. So with that, I want to introduce Elizabeth White, whose book I absolutely love. You can see all of the Post-its and the markup. Elizabeth describes herself as an aging solution advocate for older adults facing uncertain work and financial security. But what I love about Elizabeth, when I first kind of read her story and talked to her, when she couldn't find a book that met her own needs during her own bout of long-term unemployment, so what does she do? She does what older people who are resourceful do. She wrote her own book. She wrote it as a 62-year-old woman who has lived the stories that she described. She'll be sharing them with us today. And as a Harvard MBA, a former retail entrepreneur, and a C-suite executive who never expected to land at 55 and underemployed. Elizabeth is also a frequent guest blogger. She speaks at conferences and workshops. She's been named one of the top 50 influencers in aging in the country. And her essays and publications have appeared in all kinds of publications from Forbes, The Washington Post, MarketWatch, etc. And her TED Talk has garnered almost 2 million views. So with that, I want to introduce Elizabeth White.
Thank you so much for having me. I love to speak at libraries. Libraries have become like community centers. And what I found is that many of the people who read my book, who gather in resilience circles, often do it there. So thank you, Amy and Jennifer, for having me, and looking forward to speaking with you today. Janine.
Okay. So Elizabeth, let's start with your story, because many people we know or ourselves have kind of landed in a place, and I hear this all the time when I'm around doing workshops on ageism, and people are like, I don't think I'm getting hired. Something's going on. What's going on? Can you share your own story about kind of what happened to you post-recession?
So I'm somebody who was doing really well. At the time, in the years before the recession, I had two really, really good consulting jobs. One was supposed to last for 7 months, and it lasted for 7 years. And the other one was supposed to last for 1 year, and it lasted for 4. And so that income combined, I was fine. When the recession happened, who gets let go first? Consultants. So within 6 months, I lost both of those jobs. I was in my mid-50s then, and my income went to zero. And I actually wasn't worried because I have had the kind of network where, you know, when your network is usually 10 years older and maybe 10 years younger. And I would be able to find jobs before they were even posted. But when your network is 10 years older, people have already started to retire. Some people were just kind of laying low in their jobs, couldn't really help you because they didn't want to draw attention to themselves. Some people had actually died. So I noticed that my phone stopped ringing, and I have all these props and credentials, the Harvard and the this and that. And so initially, you're not worried until weeks start to turn into months, and then months turn into years. And you maybe get something, but it's not at the level that you're used to getting it. And it was at that point, a point of real despair. I remember I was in my grandson, the room that he sleeps in when he visits me. I was sitting on his bed, and I was at such a place of despair that I just wrote this essay. And I wrote the essay describing what does it feel like when you land here? When all of a sudden, the world that you know, you're sort of on the outside of that looking in. It's like you're looking through a glass, and enough time has started to go by now that you don't know if you're ever going to get back. And when I was looking for support, the kinds of books I was finding were written for policymakers, or they were written for academics. I didn't see a book that really spoke to, if you land here, if this is your story, if this has happened to you, what's the play? And so I wrote an essay first describing my experience. And I remember I wrote it in one go. And the essay went viral. And what happens now in our sort of social media world is that people will find you. So the essay went viral. I started looking at the comments. There were thousands of comments. And these comments said, they were all kind of me too. My husband, this happened to him, happened to my sister, happened to my best friend. And I read those comments, and then people will find you. They found my email address. So a comment online that was maybe, 3 or 4 sentences, when they wrote me, it was a page and a half.
Wow. So, Elizabeth, when you and I were chatting, you said you should go find that essay that I wrote, You Know Her, and I did. And sure enough, it was really powerful, and it echoed something that I've heard every time I've done a workshop across Colorado or across the country, where somebody says that ageism thing you're talking about happened to me, happened to my partner, happened to my dad. Um, do you want to share a little bit of it?
Okay, so it's 2 pages long. I'm going to read the first page.
Okay.
And it's called You Know Her. But it could also be called You Know Him. You know her. She's in your friendship circle, hidden in plain sight. Her clothes are still impeccable, bought in the good years when she was still making money. To look at her, you would not know that her electricity was cut off last week for non-payment, or that she meets the eligibility requirements for food stamps. But if you paid attention, you would see the sadness in her eyes, hear that hint of fear in her otherwise self-assured voice. These days, she buys the $1.99 trial size jug of Tide to make ends meet. You didn't know laundry detergent came in that size. You invite her to the same expensive restaurants that the two of you have always enjoyed, but she orders mineral water now with a twist of lemon instead of the $12 glass of Chardonnay. She is frugal in her menu choices, meticulous, counting every penny in her head. She demurs, dividing the table bill evenly to cover desserts, designer coffees, and second and third glasses of wine she did not consume. She is tired of trying to keep up appearances. Faking normal is wearing her out. There are no media stories about her. Her slide out of the middle class is not sensational enough. A friend says that she's broke, not poor, and there is a difference. She lives without cable, her gym membership, or nail appointments. And she discovered that she can do her own hair. And it kind of goes on like that.
So, Elizabeth, when you and I were chatting yesterday, you said something that I thought was really profound and that has really made me think in the 24 hours since we've chatted. How do we know? You use the term hiding in plain sight. What are some of the things that if we want to support a friend, what are the signs of someone hiding in plain sight? What should we be aware of? And I'd also, if you could maybe share a little bit about kind of what are the right things. I think sometimes maybe we know and we don't know the right thing to say. Share a little bit about that.
So one of the things I have to say is before I landed here, I was with people already that this had happened to, and I was looking without seeing. And what I mean by that is a friend who has an SUV and is putting $7 of gas in the SUV. Okay. Sort of seeing that, but not like making that mean what it meant. It is a friend suddenly starting to decline all the invitations who would normally join in. It is somebody, you're with them in a restaurant and they do normally order the glass of Chardonnay and now they're ordering mineral water, or they are not hungry. And there are things like that that are happening all around us if we're paying attention. It's somebody who normally what their haircut looks like, and they've gone long between haircuts. Now, I'm not talking about pandemic haircuts. I'm talking about before. Or
Yeah.
you see someone, they look just a little bit worn down at the heels, or there's a sense of tension about them that is not normally there. And there's so much pressure in our culture to not speak about economic vulnerability or financial vulnerability that we tend to hide it. And not only do we hide it, we often blame ourselves for it.
So what's the right thing to say? Is it better to just allow someone to hide, or should I be speaking up and saying, Elizabeth, are you okay?
So I think, it sort of depends on your own situation.
Mm.
I try now to avoid situations where they're dividing the bill on anything equally, because it's often not equal.
Mhm.
You have the person who gets the second glass of wine, and you have somebody else who is really trying to, uh, manage or monitor what they eat. And that person who maybe needs most not to have it divided by half, don't make that person always be the one to
Mhm.
ask. So if you're the one who it really wouldn't matter, you do the asking. It is mindfulness around the restaurants and the places that you're suggesting that people gather. And you can do things in a park, or you can do things other places. You can suggest that you take a walk. So it's just, an awareness
Yeah.
uh, that, especially if in your friendship circle or among your family members, you have people who are just different places economically.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, I feel like this is especially timely right now. And so I was so grateful that you were available to come and chat with our Changing the Narrative community now. Changing the Narrative did a survey this summer, a scientific survey of Coloradans age 50 and over. And over half have been displaced or negatively affected in their work status by the pandemic, whether they were laid off, pushed out, had hours reduced, salary reduced for the same amount of work. How prevalent is this phenomena that you've talked about in your book?
So this is something that we actually don't talk about. And the research here is stunning. So ProPublica, with the Urban Institute, did some data analysis a couple of years ago. And what they found is that a little more than half, 52% of workers in their 50s are pushed out of the job market. And, so think about that, 52%.
Mhm.
It's not like all of a sudden, all these people became incompetent.
Mhm.
These are people who had worked their whole lives and now, for some reason or another, are pushed out in all the ways you said. So it is downsizing, the salary that they used to make, or it is, a promotion where they're in some dead end kind of environment, or comments that are made that sort of land them kind of out on the street. And so I'm not surprised the statistics that you give. This was happening before the pandemic. What we know right now that there's some 2 million workers nationally who are 55 and older who've just given up finding work in this environment.
Yeah. So let's start talking about, so we kind of have a sense of the problem. And I think what is important for everybody here is to understand, like, we are not alone, right? It's part of a larger phenomena. You recommended in your book forming something that you call a resilience circle. Can you share with us a little bit what they are, how you form them, and how people can really use your book to guide discussion. So I am someone who loves book clubs, but only on topics that I like, and this is a topic I like. So I was like, oh, I want to form a book club on this. Talk to me about what a resilient circle is and how that might be helpful to people facing this right now.
So let me like step back a bit. So when I wrote this book, I wanted to write a book for people who had landed here and really didn't see other resources. And I had a friend when I was writing it, and she kept saying to me, it better not be a talkathon. You better have practical resources in this book. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really helped me, because here's the truth, when you land here, this is crazy making. You have worked your whole life. You've, been comfortable, whatever that means for you, your whole life. And now you land here. And it's embarrassing. And it is, you can be frustrated and angry. It's all of that. And you're in a world where you have to kind of pretend like none of that is happening. You have to sort of pretend like you're okay. What my resilience circle is still, are people that I can talk to, that I can go and tell the truth about what's happening to me. And let me tell you why that's important. When you do have an opportunity to meet a prospective employer, or maybe there's some consulting opportunity, if you spend, as we have now, lots of time by ourselves, where you're just full up of all these emotions of frustration, of sadness, of despair even. When you do have an opportunity to meet someone, because I'm meeting people who are here and they're reaching out to me, what I notice is they're what I call leaking. They're leaking on me, this emotion. What it means is that the person who's interviewing you doesn't know kind of what all that energy that's coming off you is. All they know is they don't want that in their work environment, or they don't want it in their project. So one of the things the Resilience Circle is a place where you can go and tell the truth. And the way I wrote the book with my Resilience Circle, there were sort of questions and resources that we exchanged. And so I put them at the end of every chapter, the kinds of things we talked about, the mindset shift that I needed to make to be able to navigate this new terrain. And we would exchange information about resources that were available. Someone told me about a program in DC that allowed me to defer paying my mortgage for 11 months. So when we would hear things, we would come back to the group and share. So I think at a time like this, when we don't really have a safety net for older adults. If I had young children, there's sort of more support. But when you're older, there's sort of not a lot there for us. So the Resilience Circle was a place I would go, and you don't need a cast of thousands. You'll decide whether you want them to even be friends. Some people are not comfortable sharing information with friends and family members. Family members are not always supportive. I've heard some incredible stories about family members, one sister shaming a brother and all of that. So if you have 3-4 people that you can gather, you can do it on Zoom, where you're going through the book. You can get the book at the library, and you read it together. It's a way to give you some grounding as you're going out into the world, interviewing, meeting people, looking for work, part-time, full-time, etc.
Yeah. So Elizabeth, if someone who's on this call wanted to start a resilience circle, how would you suggest that they even get started? Obviously, get the book or read, or get it at the library or at the bar. But how do you get started?
So you're gonna decide first whether you have other friends or family members who are in this situation, who are talking to you about it. And so there's no where you have to kind of figure out, would they want to join in this? If you didn't want to do it with people who knew you, I think you could post something on Facebook, and you could post my TED Talk on Facebook and say this that she's talking about. I'd like to get a group that where we start processing this ourselves. Where not every place is sort of opening up, but as the pandemic is easing and there are meetups again, I've seen people post on LinkedIn that they'd like to get a group together to discuss this. So I think those are the various ways that,
Is
then
this
in the,
Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, and then in the book, there is a chapter that is sort of dedicated to how you would set it up and what, some guideline, because it is not a therapy session. Sometimes you'll have someone is so full up with emotion, so much has happened to them that they really should be seeing a counselor. So it's not
It's not
that, it's not that. So this is a group of people who've landed here, are feeling that they are by themselves, want to share resources, information, that's the purpose of this group.
Yeah.
The Resilience Circle.
So one of the things, and I'm just going to kind of throw this out, and maybe towards the end of the session, I may ask people who are interested in being involved in a Resilience Circle to maybe just throw your email in the chat, and we can maybe kind of connect you with each other. So one of the reflections that I loved on the Resilience Circle, and I loved all of the end of chapter endings, was when you talked about the difference between trying to have a positive attitude and magical thinking. Because I know very often, right, we are surrounded by career coaches and well-meaning friends who are like, you got this, and, just be positive. You're amazing.
No, it is crazy.
Talk to me about the different, talk to me about how to manage that.
Crazy making all the people who think you can just go out and reinvent yourself and, you're not looking hard enough and all of that. So one of the things that, as people started talking to me in my own experience, so what I think is magical thinking. So let's say you used to make $85,000 a year, and you're now in the 26th month of being unemployed, and you got an offer that's going to pay you $42,000 a year, and you reject it. That's magical thinking. It's not that I want you to kind of stand in the space of, I will never get that $80,000+ job again. But I think you have to do what I call bridge work. Sometimes you're not going to get it right now. I had to take jobs. You and I've talked about where a friend of mine just said, Elizabeth, get off your throne. Okay, you got to get off your throne, because I was used to an income at a certain level, and you start getting, hearing about, or you'll get an opportunity, and it's a fraction, it's a third, it's a quarter of what you used to make, and you're going to be mad. But I'm saying, look at it as bridge work. Look at it as a step in the direction that you want to go. And the other thing, I remember I was offered a job. It was paid a third of what I was used to making. I was so frustrated. And a friend of mine said to me, she's in my circle, she said, I want you to look at the non-dollar benefits of this job. Don't look at the money, look at the non-dollar benefits. And the non-dollar benefit, it was a job that had me going around talking about my book to my audience. So it didn't pay a lot, but that non-dollar benefit made that job that didn't pay a lot worth it. So sometimes it might mean some technology that you otherwise would not have learned. And it's beneficial for that reason. So it just helped me to think about not to only be focused on the money, not to refuse a job when I really needed a job and, telling myself, oh, it's going to mess up my salary.
Okay, so Elizabeth, you just muted.
Apologies, Elizabeth. I accidentally just muted you just for a second. There you go.
Okay, it looks like Elizabeth's still muted, Jennifer.
There.
Okay.
I don't know where you lost me.
You were doing your wonderful gesturing.
Okay.
Well, but I want to ask kind of a follow-up question. So something else you said in the book, and I know that sometimes I've done this, and I've certainly heard friends, I mean, we complain, right? We're like, this isn't fair. What's going on? And you say in the book at some point, well, what are you getting about all the bitching and moaning about where you've landed? How does it actually benefit you? Because complaining takes energy. It can feel like action, and being stuck in a story can make you feel like you're actually doing something about it. So how do we move from that sort of feeling? Because I feel like people have got to complain for a while, right?
No,
How
and
do you
so
move from that to actually taking action that's productive and getting unstuck?
So with my resilience circle, I did complain. Like I was complaining about this low offer that I got, this consulting assignment. And then that was their response to me. Get off your throne, stop complaining, look at the non-dollar benefits of this work. So it's not that you don't complain, it's when you're complaining and you're just by yourself. You're complaining and you have no outlet. You have no other perspective. You have no one to give you some other way of looking at it that maybe you have not considered. That will take you to a very dark place.
Okay. So we also kind of know that the world of work is changing. And I think for, some who used to, in our generation have worked the W-2 job and had the salary and the benefits, whatever. And we're hearing more and more about things like older people starting their own businesses, the gig economy. Can you talk to us about a little bit about the trends that you're seeing and what should we be doing to take advantage of that?
So a third now, I think it's something like 57 million workers are what they call employer independent or in the gig economy. And this is going to only grow. And what we saw with the pandemic, it's sort of speeding this all up. So one of the benefits of the pandemic, companies that would have never allowed people to work from home, telework, who would have never, there wouldn't have been sort of this crash course in the technology of Zoom and other things, that I think going forward, we're going to see much more of a hybrid model where you have more flexibility in whether or not you can work from home or work in the office. I think this has some benefits for older Americans, especially as the pandemic is still out there. We may not want to be going out as much as younger people. And if you ask now about teleworking, you're not some outlier. It's very common. I see, when I'm looking at consulting opportunities, lots of teleworking is there part-time, much more of a normal than it was a few years ago, even a year ago. On entrepreneurship, what they don't talk about is that a full quarter of new startups are people in their 50s, and not only in their 50s, but when they look at us older folks doing these startups compared to younger people. There was a big study that MIT did. They looked at over 1 million businesses. We were more successful. Our businesses were likely to be more successful than people younger. So this view that the young person working in their parents' basement is the only one who could start a new business is false. Now, the other part of that, though, is it speaks to, because some of the reason that people are starting these businesses is because they can't find work. So they feel like they're not going to get a W-2 job, so they're going out on their own. And the data showed that in many cases, these are what they call necessity entrepreneurs or lifestyle entrepreneurs who were, not looking for, some home run when some, $30 million exit. They were looking for a job to maybe supplement another kind of work assignment they did. And so my philosophy in my own life is I think about a casserole of interesting work. So I think it is unlikely that I'm 67 now, that I will be hired in a regular 9 to 5 W-2 job. I don't even really, occasionally I'll see something that I'll think, okay, maybe I'll apply, but I generally don't apply for those jobs. But I do look for consulting assignments. I do look for a casserole. And friends of mine, so someone might do a little bit of Airbnb, they might do a little bit part-time, they might do a little bit of writing. It's combining that. And I'm, Social Security eligible. So I'm that plus building on Social Security. But I think many of us, if I'm saying that a third already are employer independent, that is the trend and where we're going. And many of us are going to be looking at what kind of casserole can we cobble together.
I love the idea of a casserole, and I'm just imagining kind of these layers, which also seems to me potentially giving a little bit of financial security, because if one layer of the lasagna kind of slides off, you've still got something else. You've got the ricotta cheese still. I hear often of people who are like, but I want to get a job. I want to get, I want to get the 40, 50, 60, maybe not 60-hour a week. I want to get the job. I want the benefits. Should I be shaving years off my resume? Should I dye my hair? Should I get Botox? What would you say to, I think, people who are, still hoping, I want to get a regular job like I used to. Forget this casserole stuff.
Yeah. So a couple of things on the regular job. There are what they call returnships, really hard to get. But this is where your, sort of mainstream companies have a program. It's like an internship for mid-career and sometimes senior career people. iRelaunch is the one that's sort of expert at this. They have the names of most of them, but it's a paid like internship for mid-career people. It started some years ago when women were leaving the workforce in droves, not just to care for our children, but because we didn't like how we were treated in the workplace, didn't feel like we had the advancement opportunities, and we were quitting. So these returnships were initially started to try to woo women back into the workplace, but now they also can include men. So that's if you want to, like, 9 to 5 is what you want, W-2 is what you want. That's sort of one thing you can look at. I relaunch, as I said, last time I looked, they had maybe 80 of them, different companies that do that, and that's their specialization. On the Botox, hair dyeing, and all of that, I think you have to do what makes you feel confident. I have always had some kind of, natural hair. And I remember once I was a baby banker years ago, and I walked into I was sent with something to give in another office. I had on a white suit and I had my hair, I think it was cornrowed back. And as soon as I got back to my little desk, it wasn't even an office, it wasn't a cubicle, I was just sitting out in the open. I had a call to go see this very senior Black executive. And he said to me, have you ever seen the ad, My Broker is E.F. Hutton, how everything froze? He said, when you walked into that room with that hair, that's what happened over there. And he says, this is what I'm going to say to you. And then I always have a diamond nose post too. So he said, there will come a time when you're going to be equal in every way. And there's an opportunity and you're competing with somebody else and they may get it because of your hair, or they may get it because you have that diamond. Okay. So I just want you to know that. I'm not telling you what to do, but I want you to know that there's some cost to it. You see my hair, it's never changed. It's always in some style. So that's the price that I was willing to pay. The only other thing I would say on this is that when we start hiding our age, then the work on ageism to get people used to our hair, our bodies, our way of thinking, plus our insights, our wisdom, it all comes together. When we start hiding that, we delay for everybody a chance to normalize. Because I have this thing where you'll see this term successful aging. And what I notice about it, it's really about how many youthful attributes can you hang on to. That's what successful aging, and that's the wrong definition. So that would be, you got to do what feels comfortable for you. You've got to know that there's some risk. If you decide that you're not doing anything, whether you're prepared to pay that. And then know that we are, as older adults, on a mission to change the narrative about how we're perceived. But if we don't show up as we are, we're actually not changing the narrative.
Elizabeth, I love that. Thank you for saying that. So I think this is a great segue because you started to suggest collectively what we can do. And I know very often you are in that situation and right now you've got to make a mortgage payment, a rent payment, it's kind of hard to think about the bigger picture about policy. But something that you said in your book really struck me. You say it will take years for our government and institutions to find and scale solutions to the myriad of problems that underlie the retirement income crisis. And as those most affected by the crisis, meaning all of us here, part of our job is pressuring them to do more and to do it faster. So policy advocacy. How would you convince people who are kind of right now focused on their own survival that it's worth even a small amount of their time to be engaged in policy advocacy? And then we'll talk a little bit about some policies that are out there.
And so here's what I know is real. I'm not going to talk to that person about that, okay? Because I know where you are. And you right now, actually, you're trying to survive. You don't have time to kind of, it's one foot in front of the other. So those who have the opportunity to do it, I think we should be taking the lead on that. I think when you're in a place that is desperate, if you're asked to sign something or you're asked Certainly you can vote for things, but I would not say that activism, when you're in the real throes of this, is like what you should be doing first.
Okay, that's helpful. So right now we know, and I'm noticing, even though I said I'm not looking at chat because my attention deficit disorder will start coming through, I've noticed that a number of people have talked about ageism in the workplace. We know that it's real. An AARP study found that 2/3 of people age 45 and over had either, and this is nationally, had either experienced or witnessed age discrimination in the workplace. And we know in Colorado, in that survey that Changing the Narrative did this summer, 1/3 of people said, yes, we have experienced age discrimination, and 40% of respondents said, we're not sure. And when we read the open-ended remarks and the kind of things that were said and dealt to them, we were like, yes, you did experience age discrimination. So right now, though, interesting, there is this sort of opportunity, both at a national level and in Colorado. Efforts are underway to strengthen age discrimination laws because they are not as strong as laws against other kind of bias. So let's talk about the national effort first. Last week, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act was reintroduced in Congress, not for the first time, and had a hearing in front of the Committee on Education and Labor. Why is this bill so important, and what should people do about it?
So we were talking earlier about, half the people getting pushed out of the workforce in their 50s. Well, here's the other piece of that. When you start to look at how much money have people set aside, because we now have, this new longevity, this healthy extended life expectancy. So that if you are in reasonably good health at 65, you could live another 20 years. So when you look at the median retirement savings for middle income near retirees, we're talking about $60,000. Okay, there are all kinds of numbers all over the place. The highest I've seen it is $134,000. So you think $134,000, okay, you're in your mid 50s and you got to have that money, you're not working, because people do go back to work, but only 10% of the people who are pushed out ever again get jobs that were commensurate in pay with the jobs they left. If you're not working, how are you going to support yourself all those years? So in this, longer lives mean that many more of us are going to have to work longer than we ever expected. And I like to frame this differently than like most people frame it. I look at it like this. The over 50 consumer, there are over 110 million of us. We spend nearly $8 trillion a year. We account for most of the spending on cars, on trucks, on apparel, on consumer packaged goods, etc. If big numbers of us aren't working, I don't have to go to a restaurant. I don't have to buy clothes every season. I don't have to, people can keep their Chevy. They don't have to trade it in every 4 years. If we are not employed, we can't spend money, and we're big drivers of the economy. So framing it in these terms rather than, oh, please hire us, please hire us, I think we need to change how we frame it. The second thing from my point of view is there are companies that are on the cutting edge. They do know how to hire older workers, how to retain older workers. They are already committed to an intergenerational workforce. We should be celebrating those companies. I don't know if there's an award that they get, But I'm not interested in the laggard companies that we gotta persuade and they don't get it. And, we're all grandmas and grandpas. Not interested. Let's focus on the companies that do get it. And then what sort of incentives do they need to do more? Are there wage offsets? Okay. Is there technology so that if there's some sort of physical exertion, bending, lifting, squatting, is there technology? And I know there is, that could make it easier. So we're not having to do this 1,000 times. So the workplace age discrimination, getting that passed is important, but that for me is the starting point.
Mhm.
That means that, if that's passed, if there's a big fight and you feel like you're discriminated against, you have some teeth in the law now, and maybe you won't win. Maybe you will win. But beyond that, we need more companies to be here. We need incentive framework for them to get there. We need to be celebrating them. Okay. I'd like to see in the way that Biden hired John Kerry to be the presidential envoy on climate change.
Mhm.
I want to see a presidential envoy on age, longevity, and retirement security. We have a president who's pushing almost to 80.
Mhm.
He knows what it's like. Remember when he was running? Oh, he's so old, he shouldn't run, he needs to get out of the way. He understands
Yep.
what ageism is. He experienced it. Even now, if he has a little trip, people are like, oh, he's so might he be our biggest advocate on this to
Well,
reframe how we think about it?
I think he already is changing the narrative about aging, because everything he's doing is bold and impressive and clearly is demonstrating that older people can learn new things. So thank you for sharing that. I want to call up now for a moment, and then we will go to audience kind of comments and questions. Jody Waterhouse from Colorado Senior Lobby and the Multidisciplinary Center on Aging. I am hoping you are here. And this is important for those of you in Colorado to know. So a group of us have been working for some time to try to strengthen age discrimination laws. And Jody is on the board of Colorado Senior Lobby, which took a position on Monday of strongly supporting something called Senate Bill 21-176 that's actually going to committee hearing tomorrow. And Jody, I'm wondering if you could step up, be spotlighted by our friends at Denver Public Library, and just tell everybody a little about what this is and why it's important in Colorado.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. And Elizabeth, a huge thank you for being here today. This has been a fabulous discussion and just reiterates the hard work that we're all doing in the state of Colorado to try and eliminate age discrimination. So as Janine said, I am a board member of the Colorado Senior Lobby. And there's really a couple different initiatives around age discrimination that are happening here in Colorado. And we should really celebrate the fact that we are here and that a couple of these wonderful organizations really elevate the voice of issues for older Coloradans. We advocate and we educate the legislature and all those at the Capitol, as well as throughout our communities in the state of Colorado about those issues that do impact older Coloradans. As Janine mentioned, there are a couple different legislative bills that are on the table right now. And yes, Senate Bill 21-176 actually will be heard on Thursday. And that bill really focuses on age discrimination to get the damages should an age discrimination case come to fruition that people so desperately need. That has not been the case. So it really repeals the limits on remedies in cases involving age discrimination. We are working very closely with Colorado Senior Lobby and Bell Policy The senators who have sponsored that are Winter, Patterson, and then Reps Lontine and Gray. And so we're super thankful for all of their work on that. Another piece of legislation that we're working on for down the road is that of eliminating the high school graduation dates on job applications. And I actually saw in the chat room, someone actually asked, is there a way that we can eliminate those boxes on job applications? Because as we all know, as soon as we put our high school graduation date, it pretty closely estimates your age. And so we're going to be working hard later this year on trying to eliminate that as well. So back in November, and we hosted a workforce age discrimination summit. And then we followed up in February with Older Coloradans Week, an entire session dedicated to age discrimination. And following both of those summits, we asked folks who are interested in advocating in this area to get more involved. And so Janine may talk a little bit about how to do that. But in order to get these things passed, these new policies implemented, we really need your voice as older adults to help us work this through the system. So thank you again to Elizabeth for being here, and to Janine, and certainly our friends at Denver Public Library for hosting such an important discussion around age discrimination. And we look forward to working with all of you for future legislation. Thanks, Janine.
Jody, thanks so much. So I'm actually going ahead and pasting a link in the chat right now. It's a bit.ly link that is basically End to Ageism Together. And if you want to get involved, it has a bunch of, if you go through, it's a forum. There are a number of ways that you can get involved. You could host an event like this. We can bring Elizabeth back. We can write letters to the editor. We can talk to legislators. So there are a whole lot of ways to get involved. So if you're interested, just go ahead and fill that out. I've just put it in the link. I now want to turn it, and Elizabeth, before I turn it over for audience questions, do you want to make, I don't want to say a final statement because you're going to be answering the audience questions, but is there something else you'd want to add, or I should have asked you that I did not?
Yeah, so a quick question on the taking the high school. Is it only high school or is it also college graduation?
It would be, so it's still in progress, but it would be, we've described it broadly as age identifiers. So probably graduation dates. We know that what has been interesting to us, and I'll share briefly a story that actually of a woman who was one of our, we call our volunteers change agents, and she is our age, but went back to college later after she had children. And so, and she's got excellent social media skills. And so applied for a social media job, got an interview because of her college graduation date. And of course, when she walked in, people were like, kind of what's going on here. So I think generally age identifiers would be kind of our preference. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also want to note, I know we mentioned making the case to employers. So one of the things that Changing the Narrative has done is partnered with the National Age Friendly Foundation. And we are offering assessment and certification to employers based in Colorado to encourage more to basically raise their hand and say, yes, I appreciate the value of older workers and of intergenerational workplaces. So, okay. Should we turn it over to the audience?
I can either do a quick sum up, or I can do it after.
Why don't you do a quick sum?
So here are the things I'd like you to take away. One, that you're not alone. When this first happened to me, I really thought that this had happened to me and a very small group of people. And part of the reason it was shattering and embarrassing is that I didn't understand that it is a national phenomenon. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't take any personal responsibility. And I say, if you look through my life, you'll see, I did this dumb thing or that dumb thing. That's going to be true for all of us. It is when this many people have landed here from all kinds of walks of life that there's something systemic happening. The second thing is that, you know, now cavalry is not coming. There's not, you know, we're trying to get some of this legislation going. There is, you know, the World Health Organization has just done a global focus on ageism. It's just coming now. But we're the first generation that's going to live this long, have this longer life and all that that means. And it's will impact every sector of our society and our economy. Right now in the workplace, there are places that already have 5 generations there. It no longer means that you graduate at 22, because we're looking now, you know, if you take the pandemic out and sort of look at what's happening with life expectancy, we're looking at the 100-year life. So you're not going to be 22 graduating from college and not need to be reskilled, retrained again and again. So the whole thing is happening. I say to get rid of the magical thinking, what I was, you know, and know when you've got to pivot and do something practical. Get off your throne. I know many of you have had the kinds of jobs you're not going to like what's happening now, what you're being offered. I want you to think about bridge work, that you may have to do this for a time. And I want you to think of multiple income streams, cobbling things together. You might have to do that as part of the bridge work. And I want you to think strategy, not failure. If you need to get food stamps, go get your food stamps. The things that you are eligible for, if you need to be on a list for affordable housing, go do it. Right now, there are a third of the people who are in their 50s and 60s eligible for food stamps, and they're not getting it. Do what you need to do to make sure you can get to the next place. That's the, if you're like, oh, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, you know, think strategy, not failure. And we didn't talk about smalling up, which is, I had to like think about and figure out like what matters to me now. The pandemic, I think, has done that for many of us. I am cooking way more and I'm a better cook than I thought. I was a restaurant goer. You know, I have a friend who for Sunday for her is working in her garden. That is church. You know, so really figuring out what matters to you, what you want to spend money on, what's not worth spending money on, and think about your own resilience circle. Doesn't have to be a cast of thousands. It might be you and 2 other people to walk with you through this period. Isolation, you've all read the same stuff I'm reading, is a big problem. And it's something else, crazy making. You can get off your game because you're spending like so much time by yourself. And there are ways that you can gather now that we didn't have a year ago. And I close with that. So I'm ready now for the questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So what I'm going to ask people to do is go ahead and put their questions in the chat, and either Amy or Jennifer will queue them up. That way we'll have a list of all the questions. If we cannot get to things during our time together, we can make sure that we get things to you after. So Amy and Jennifer, or Amy, are you going to be our chat queuer up?
I think Jen and I are going to do it together, but I was going to say, as people are putting their questions in there, and I encourage them to do that, we did have some questions while you were talking that popped up that I took note of. One person brought up the issue that I know both of you have addressed before, but that idea of being told to step aside, make room for younger people, let younger people come up, your time is over. How do you deal with that, especially when you don't have a source of income? That us versus themness.
Yeah.
What do you suggest for people who are hearing that, who are facing that?
Yeah. Elizabeth.
Yeah, and this is what age discrimination is about. And there's no, I think, kind of quick, like, oh, this is the silver bullet, you say this and that will all disappear. We're going to hear that. I hear that. So I think it's really knowing it's not you, and it is upping the numbers of places that you're looking. I think there's also something, what I found when this was happening to me is when I would get an opportunity, I would actually befriend people in the environment who are maybe in their 40s. Like normally I might be gravitating to people who are closer to my age, but I was conscious of, if I'm on a committee or if I'm in something that is intergenerational, that I would get to know younger people. And the reason for that is they are often where they will know where the opportunities are. In some sort of nonprofit, they're the ones who know what jobs are coming up, what opportunities are coming up. And I would say before the pandemic, if I were to look at my last 3 job opportunities, they didn't come from people my age. They came from younger people that I was cultivating. So it's gonna happen. It's gonna make you mad when people are speaking to you in this way. That's why I was saying our president heard it. It doesn't matter what level you're on, you're going to hear it. It is, how do you have offsets in your life? So that's not the only thing you're hearing. How do you have a place you can go where you can complain that that's happened? So.
And I just want to add, so I don't suggest that you say this to someone saying it to you, especially if it's your employer, but it's factually incorrect. It is not. The longer that we all stay in the workplace as we get older, the better it is for the overall economy and the better it is on a macro level for younger workers. So there is something geeky called the lump of labor theory. And the lump of labor theory suggests that, like, if this group is in, this group is out. And it's simply, every economist who's looked at it has said that's a fallacy. So, but don't go say to your employer, that's the lump of labor theory. And probably
no,
not.
and I would, the most frustrating thing, it's not always young people doing this to us.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the person pulling up the drawbridge, you think, I'm younger than you. It is, so, this is the fight we're in. The legislation will help, but the attitude shifting will take longer, but we all have our, part to play. And so if you are still working now and you are considering, you need a person for XYZ position, because often age is not a diversity factor, and it should be. If you're looking at gender and you're looking at race and you're looking at ethnicity, you should be looking at age. So that means every slate of candidates, age should be one of the diversity factors. If you're looking, let's say you are organizing a panel to talk on some subject, and you're looking for diversity there, age should be a factor. So people who are still in the work game and you are hiring, you are, doing the conferences, you are picking the keynotes, there's something practical you can do. The same thing you do on gender and race, you should be doing it on age.
Great.
Are you ready for another question from our audience? Okay, we just got one through chat that asked, what is the single most important thing you would have done differently at the outset of your job loss experience, knowing what you know now?
It would be to downsize and immediately drastically cut back on expenses, because what I thought, since I had never had trouble finding work before, is I'm looking at 2 months, 6 weeks, 2 months, and I'll find the next thing. And then at the 2 months, okay, it's 2 more months. And then you're sort of racing through your savings. So the first thing is that drastic cutback. I didn't know then what I know now, that older workers, we have much longer bouts of unemployment than everybody else.
Great, thank
A little
you.
bit of a follow-up question to that, because a lot of folks were asking specific questions about that, like extended periods of unemployment and what can we do about that, and also kind of like the emotional bit of what can you say to friends who are kind of just like, oh, it's okay, you'll be fine, when you've been unemployed for multiple years.
So one of the things that happened under the pandemic that is phenomenal is that people who had, normally, if you were a 1099er, you did not get unemployment assistance. If you were an Uber driver or, some kind of 1099 person, contractor, consultant, you did not get unemployment. They have changed that under the pandemic, and that needs to stick, because if you have a third of the workforce that's already there, it's a big number of people that could help. So that was, I thought a big change that was, that happened with the pandemic that I hope continues. Are you ask me again, Jennifer, the specific thing?
I'm looking back, and I think you touched on it too, was kind of like how do you respond to friends who are kind of just like, it's going to be all right? Really hard, and sometimes it's just not.
So I hope today that you've been equipped with some data. So you don't bury people in data. I like to sprinkle them through, kind of like chocolate chips. But there are, when you say that, look, half the people who are in their 50s have been pushed out of the workforce, that's the data. And these reinvention stories, this thing of lawyer turns pastry chef and kind of all of that, that's not like the common experience. And in a way, until we start talking honestly about like what's the real experience, then that's why we get these questions, because people think, oh, you can just reinvent yourself. Okay. Or they see an article on it. So we're going to make our path here by walking. We're going to make our path because we're saying it. And the reason I'm pushing the resilience circle, I want, when you're beat up out there with that you have someplace else you can go, tell those war stories, tell what's happened, get some support, and then be able to go out again. Because this is not only is there ageism out there, there's our own internalized ageism. This is a straight vertical lift, moving the needle on this one.
Right. And can I say, Elizabeth, one of the things that I thought was extraordinary about the book was it didn't just lay out kind of the story, but it is chock full of resources and ideas. So looking at, roommates and house sharing, and, here are kind of resources, and here are different programs that are available. So this to me is probably a compilation of all of that resilient circle work. And I'm looking at a lot of the things that are in the chat. What we will do with the chat after this is we'll kind of pull out the resources and basically send out kind of a resource guide along with the recording of this. But great question. Thank you.
So one person asked if there, we did talk about a lot of older adults going into business for themselves because they can't get hired. And someone else asked, are there particular industries, are there particular types of employment people should be trying to pivot to, in your opinion?
So I think on the entrepreneurship, that I remember seeing that the Small Business Administration, I think working with AARP, actually there's a specific program that you can find through them, because that's sort of to help you to refine your idea, to, you know, how do you organize, where there might be some funding sources. Much more needs to be done on this, you know, where, you know, people who are looking for $25,000, not $25 million, it's not fully developed. And I find the entrepreneur ecosystem, actually, they don't really understand these necessity entrepreneurs or lifestyle entrepreneurs. We don't get the respect that, you know, the ones who want the, you know, 30 million exit get. So I think this is actually something that would be interesting for an AARP to look at. How do we support workers? Because we are starting, but how to make sure that we could be more successful. Yeah.
And AARP actually does have kind of an entrepreneurial program. You know, there are a number of kind of Colorado-based resources that I'll share kind of when we send this out. But I think as more and more people are looking to entrepreneurship, and I think, you know, Denver Public Library has some amazing.
I was going to say that, Janine.
Oh, well, you know, I know there are amazing resources, so have some as well.
Thank
So,
you.
but I also, I mean, what all of this, and even this chat is suggesting to me, Elizabeth, is the power of Resilient Circle, because in a way in the chat, we've started a Resilient Circle building because people are sharing resources and thoughts.
Is it possible that I'll be, because I'm not like reading the chat, can the chat be saved that I could?
I will save the chat and get it to you. For confidentiality, we don't share generally the chat because it has people's name. I will share it with you, but I will also we go through and basically edit and pull out the resources. But I'll share it with you. But we won't share it broadly because we promise people confidentiality. That's what my people at Denver Public Library keep telling me. So anyway, I think we can take a couple of final questions. Jenny or Amy, do you see something there that hasn't been touched on?
Jen, do you have one, or I have one if you don't?
Go ahead, Amy, go ahead.
Well, a few people have mentioned the intersectionality that happens here: age and gender, age and race, age and sexual identity. And it cuts all these different ways, right? Both emotionally, culturally, practically, how people perceive us, how we perceive ourselves. This is a huge topic. This could be a whole other conversation. I don't know if you had some thoughts, a few thoughts to share on that topic.
So one of the things, so in my book, I have quotes from lots of people, but there are a few people that I profile in more detail. And there are a few men that I profile in particular. And with the men, I ask them, you write your story and then I'll kind of edit it down for size. And the reason I did that is what I found with men is the how hard this is for men, and white men in particular, who this might be the first ism they've ever experienced, the first time they've ever been discriminated against based on something they have no control over. And then all the stuff around provider. And so the failure tape runs, you know, it's more present, I found, with men. So that's why I wanted in the book to have, and my favorite is a person that's become a dear friend of mine named Bruce, his, you know, the writing of his story. But it goes on. I had a Black man tell me that as he got older, that he felt that people were no longer intimidated by him, and what a relief that was. That he was a taller, and, you know, in his youth had been bigger, and that he had, you know, would see people cross the street if he walk. So there's so many different ways that the intersection happens. I am Black, I'm a woman, I'm now old, you know, so it's like, what else? You know, I was working the other ones before I knew, so this is just not the one that's even predominant for me. So, you know, to your point, Amy, there's so much richness in that conversation and what old means in different cultures, how people process it, what it means for men, you know, white men in particular. There's really kind of a lot there.
So I think I'm going to ask you to, I don't know, give some final words of advice, share some wisdom, Elizabeth, and then I want to save 2 minutes at the end to kind of do a call to action. So Elizabeth, we're giving you the last word.
No, so before we did the questions, I did the close that I wanted to do. I just want to say, thank you so much for hosting this kind of conversation, allowing me to share what I think with so many people, and continuing to do this work. You know, I'm one person. I saw, you know, 150 people on the call at some points. Each of you has a voice and a place where I think of it in terms of what talent, experience, network can we bring to this? And we all have something, and you sort of do what you can with what you have to kind of move the needle on this ageism, because it's really, I want us to get to a place where we're not focused only on all the challenges. This longer life, also, there are a lot of opportunities here for us to rethink and reimagine what it means to be old in America. And it is our generation, because I often say to people, this is not a pesky little boomer problem. These Gen Xers right behind us and the millennials, they're not going to have pensions either. Right. They're also facing uncertain work and escalating cost and housing. And this discrimination thing, especially for women, starts at 40. Mm-hmm. So they need to be allies with us as we try to move the needle on some of these things. Again, thank you so much for having me.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. So I'm going to do a couple of calls for action. I am going to thank a couple of other people, and then we are all who are remaining on this call going to give Elizabeth a round of applause. So first call to action. I am pasting in again, if you're at the point in your life where you want to get involved in some advocacy work, you can fill out the link there, End Ageism Together, and there are a lot of options for you. If you want to get involved in resiliency circles, I have no idea what this is going to look like. Changing the Narrative is not hosting, but I can put people together. So if you want to drop your email, if you're interested in participating, and we'll kind of talk to some of our partners.
And let me add this, I'm going to add, and if they do that on the Resilience Circle, I promise I will figure out how to pop in at some point.
Fantastic. Yes, Elizabeth, thank you. I want to thank a couple of others and also recommend some reasons. So I want to thank Colorado Senior Lobby, because they are really doing some, along with Bell Policy Center and a number of organizations who are working really hard to change the age discrimination laws. And that's really important. I want to thank Boomers Leading Change and Encore Boston and ARP Colorado, who all shared links to this. And I want you to know that both, for those of you who are kind of, searching, looking for workshops, et cetera, both Boomers Leading Change in Colorado and Encore Boston in Massachusetts, but both are doing virtual, right? So you can pick up anywhere, have outstanding programs. So if you want, and I'll put links in the follow-up of how you can get on their mailing list. We can do this. We can do this. I think we wanted to have Elizabeth here because I know from my work and talking to so many of you that we're not alone, and it is a rampant problem, but together I believe that we can solve anything. I want to thank Elizabeth so much for agreeing when we reached out to her. We didn't know what it was going to look like, but we basically said, we want to do something with you. So Elizabeth, thank you so much. And now if I can ask everybody, if you can unpin me, if we can everybody do gallery view, and maybe if you've turned your video off, if you could turn it back on for a moment. And I just want to end with a round of applause. And you can also take your mute off, and let's end with a round of applause for Elizabeth.
Yay!
Thank you,
Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. You have inspired so many today.
Thank
We are
you.
so appreciative.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Merci.
And thank you, as usual,
Thank you.
my pals at Denver Public Library. I can't wait to see what good trouble we get into next.